I'm Justin Young. I'm the CEO of RICS. I've only been in post 5 months, so this is a rapid learning process for me. RICS, as you know, is a professional body, but also a regulator. So you might see there'll be some questions on regulation coming up over the next hour. My background is in business transformation, so some of the skills of change and so on that the team have here, I think that's going to come up a lot as well. So, Sam, over to you.
Okay, I just have to talk closer to it. So I'm Sam Ebner. I'm a chartered environmentalist and an environmental engineer by background, but I'm working in Jacobs now with a history of water utilities especially, but across the utility portfolio of water, waste and energy. But more recently, in the last 5 years, I've been more in digital transformation and now working very much in digital, smart cities, and all those kind of associated topics, innovation, technology. Jacobs is a wonderful place to be able to explore many, many different industries. And we've been talking quite a lot about master plans and sustainability as well. So this is where digital and smart cities really can bring stuff to the forefront. So, thank you.
So Sam actually has the best title of anybody I think I've ever met, according to your bio. So you are the Director of Intelligent Transformation. Is that correct?
Yeah, Assistant Director in Intelligent.
Intelligent transformation. I'm sure all of us would like our intelligence transformed to one degree or another. Thank you for your intro, Sam. So, Farah, turning to you, could you perhaps give an introduction of yourself, please?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So my name is Farah Ghanem. I'm head of climate change and policies department at Alpen. It's a recent department that was launched to address the issue of climate change. We work with our clients on their ESG reporting, ESG strategies, carbon emission assessments, decarbonization, and net zero strategies. We've worked on multiple built environment portfolios, both in the region, in UAE and in Saudi Arabia, achieving their net zero targets.
And of course, you're based just down the road in Masdar City. So as we were talking earlier on, fantastic. Azza, to you. The thing I was most impressed about when I looked at the company online, so for Solutions Plus, bringing clarity of thought and simplicity of action. And I thought if anything encapsulated what I hope COP28 will bring, it was exactly that. I think that's just a perfect phrase. But please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Justin. I'm Azza Zaabi, the Associate Director of Integrated Facilities Management at Solutions Plus, a Mubadala-owned company. My background is architecture and urban planning as well. Throughout my career, I've been managing and supervising and ensuring that, whatever master plans that we are implementing, regardless of the type of the land use, whether it's going to be commercial, residential, industrial, that we are becoming really focused in our objective. We have to have clarity on how to be really looking after the environment and the people who are going to live in there and to use these facilities. Today, for the past 4 years, I've been involved in the operational side of the equation, which is basically looking after the buildings and ensuring that they are also compliant in terms of, how to be very efficient, if I would say.
Perfect. Thank you so much, all of you. If we are going to report emissions properly, we've got to have structured data. And how do we go about getting that structured data around decarbonisation of the built environment? So, Sam, if I could turn to you first.
Yeah, so I think this is a core of anything that we do around data and digital. I mean, we're very clear on what the purpose is of this data, but we do need to make sure we design in a purpose. So we should have a strategy. It might be very simple, actually, but we do need a data strategy or a digital strategy. So that will identify what the purpose is, what we're going to capture, and there's some, as you say, very beautiful standards and protocols that we can follow, like the Basic Plus framework, for instance, that does the community-wide GHG standardization. That will give us what we want to capture. Then we have to understand how we're going to capture it. And we have to understand every single time we put in a digital or a data piece, it comes with its own carbon footprint. Whether or not that's from the data centers that we put in, the extra sensors that we install, the equipment that we use that we actually are using to be able to capture this information, this data, it has a carbon footprint as well that we need to consider. But yeah, so obviously, as I mentioned, I'm from the smart city side of things. This is where actually smart cities comes into its own, because we can put and design in early in these master plans that we were talking about earlier, where we're going to capture data and for what purpose, and make sure that we understand from end to end, and from the beginning of the design all the way through to the decommissioning of that asset, where that data is going to come from and how we're going to capture it in a structured way. So this is not just the sensor, it's the sensor, the communications, the firewalls, the cybersecurity, the digital assets, the cabling, the servers, and then how the person at the other end is going to integrate and use it. So going to one-click LCA, for instance, to be able to actually start doing the assessments and then finally reporting it. So it is a full end-to-end capture that we need to not just standardize, but also understand how we're going to capture it, where we're going to use it, and who's going to eventually report on it.
I think that's the crucial piece, isn't it, at the end, is like, who is using this data for what purpose? Farah, turning to you, and clearly in your sustainability role, sustainability data must be crucial to what you're doing. So how do you see it coming together?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the main challenge, the main question always with our clients is, how do I provide you with the information that you're requesting so that I can develop my report, develop my strategy, or do my my emission assessment? And I think, just as was just mentioned, the issue is that there's a lack of data collection strategy or data collection process, which is evident that most clients have a lack of a monitoring and reporting process to which they can gather the data they need and then report on it. The importance of collecting the data is not just for the reporting and the assessment purposes, but also for their own performance auditing procedures. So how do I know if I'm doing better, if I'm doing worse, if I'm not collecting data on a regular basis and not just waiting until the end of the year and then trying to backdate everything, circle through all the backlog. No, it has to be a systematic approach. There should be a systematic process at which these data is being collected. And of course, digitizing the process reduces errors, reduces inaccuracies, and makes sure it's done on a scheduled and structured framework.
I think that point around digitization, and particularly the sort of robotic process automation that can help provide accurate data, but also make life a lot more interesting for people who are working in that space. So they're not having to do these highly repetitive, really tedious tasks, as you say, sometimes a year in arrears, and they're scrabbling to find where the data is. That's perfect.
And if you don't mind, I'll add to
dying
that as
to
well.
jump in,
Yeah,
Sam.
because the smart cities thing does exactly that, right? You're taking that data, as you say, to automate, but automation is actually partly how we make energy efficiencies. By it being able to, we were mentioning HVAC earlier, being able to take those sensors of temperature and occupancy, bring them through the building management system, putting them up in the cloud, doing some nice AI or some basic control and predictive analysis, and then bringing that back down and automating it so a human doesn't even need to be involved. We automatically decarbonize our built environment.
Perfect. Azza, from your perspective, and being doing a lot of stuff on the ground, as you were saying at the moment in your role currently, there must be a huge amount of information that's being collected and data that's being collected.
Well, as you mentioned, Justin and the colleagues here, is the data is very crucial element for us in order for us to perform and to manage the operations of the building, and also it's supporting us not only for the operations but also for decision making pertaining to the investment requirements or the right decisions to change certain attributes of the building. So the challenge that we face honestly in some of the cases is that the lack of data, the quality of the data, and the scarcity of as-built drawings, the digitized format of these data as well, the structured categorization. So name it. I mean, the challenges, I think it's the same language spoken here. So, and in order for us to ensure that, we perform to the SLAs and the KPIs and the expectations of the client, and also to the expectation of the sustainability agenda, we need to ensure how healthy the data set is. what are the methodologies of collecting the data as well is very crucial to us. Are we through manual means that we are, collecting the data, or it's a second-hand data, or it's, outdated data as well? It's very crucial for us to have a very dependent, liable, and reliable source of information, because everything later on will follow. I mean, it's the domino effect, basically. Yeah.
Absolutely, and if people haven't done that data first design, then you are always trying to play catch up, aren't you?
100%. Yeah.
So I did say, because we're a regulator, I was going to talk about regulation, and I'm certainly going to come on to that now. Fascinating. At COP during this week, I was in the innovation zone, and a Slido question came up during one of the sessions. And it was asking, what is the most important thing that we need to push the decarbonisation agenda now? And there were a couple of, well, about 3 or 4 options, one of which was regulation, the other was innovation. Regulation got 80%, innovation got 0%. Now, the irony of that, given that we were in an innovation zone, was not lost on the audience. But I think as much as anything, what it really shows is the absolute importance of regulation when you're really starting out on this journey. So, Farah, perhaps I can come to you first on the sort of a structured approach to data, of course, but that necessarily means some level of regulation if we're all going to be doing the same thing that drives the right behavior and the right outcomes.
Yeah, of course. And I think here, at least from, let's say, my perspective on the type of data that needs to be regulated, since we're talking about decarbonization, I think it's important to regulate the data that relates to the carbon emission assessment itself. And that's a struggle that I face as a consultant as well on projects, is that which data set do I use? Do I use the local data set? Do I use the data set that I bought from Europe? Do I use the data set that's in the GHG protocol? And then if I use a different data set for a different client, the results are different. They're not comparable. It's no longer apples to apples. So having a regulation, or at least a policy that says this is the source of data that you should go to, and then establish, of course, that particular source, would drive several aspects when it comes to the reporting on emissions, and also in developing the decarbonization strategies. It drives accountability, it drives reliability of the data, and it ensures that it's done in a streamlined and structured way that can be revised and continuously improved with time.
Sam, do you want to provide a perspective on that as well?
I had so many things flying through my brain. And now
I could see it in your eyes. That was going on.
And now I'm trying to pick out the bits that I'm interested in. Sorry, no, you're going to have to come back to me, I think.
Very good. From your perspective, regulation, where do you see, how useful do you see that being, and how important is it as far as this kind of collection of data goes?
Yeah, I think primarily if we are looking at the sectors that are contributing to the most, CO2 emission, I mean, it's globally, assessed and looked at as well. You would look at primarily the sectors of transportation and industrial. And those are the highest, honestly, qualifiers for the quality of data to be, collected and to be regulated. Because honestly, the impact of these sectors is tangible, and it needs to be looked at from a regulatory perspective, all the way cascaded down to the entities and organizations that are responsible for the operation of these main primarily sectors. Because the other sectors pertaining to the commercial and residential would primarily depend on I would say, the people behavior within these buildings, and also the investors, mindset somehow. And that could be looked at from a financial perspective, more than sort of regulatory framework. So the sectors that are directly linked to the government and the regulatory framework, and wherever the region is, I think it's primarily focused onto the, logistics, transportation, and industrial, and so forth. Yeah.
I'm ready.
Okay, Sam.
It was interesting when you said about the Slido and the fact that what else was on there? Was finance on there?
Yes, finance was on there. I can't remember what the fourth one was.
Okay, because one of the things that we came up in a panel discussion yesterday, one of our colleagues had been to COP, and they were talking about the African countries. He's an African guy, and he was saying that they've just released a load of green finance that's specifically around infrastructure and buildings and the built environment, and the fact that the guys who had brought the African leaders had actually just ripped up all their policies because their policies wouldn't allow them to get that green finance. So they're actually modifying their regulation automatically to be able to actually enable them to get access to that financial body and that capital. So it was just a really interesting point to see that what drives what, does finance drive regulation and then regulation drive innovation? Or, I feel like innovation gets created based on how much money you've got and how much the need is, the pressure is, and the penalties are, probably, to go with that.
Yeah, and I think a bit of that came up in the panel earlier, didn't it? That sort of carrot and stick of, yes, we need standards, but if you do reach the standards, then there might be some tax breaks in it for you or something like that. So that really close relationship between finance and regulation. And coming to you on a similar topic, but that of setting standards, as I was just mentioning, in your part of the built environment world that you're kind of dealing with now, standards are crucially important, aren't they? I mean, if only for health and safety, but for a whole other reasons as well.
Well, just to give the audience overview of the assets that we are managing is basically across different sectors. We are managing the operations of healthcare sector, commercial, office space, residential as well, industrial. So at Solutions Plus, we provide, the service of the facility management, healthcare, HSE, security, and so forth. So under one roof. And we have to ensure the compatibility and the applicability of the regulations are intact within these buildings. We don't jeopardize for the safety and the compliance aspects with the local regulatory bodies. For example, if we are embarking a new fit-out project as well. Today we're managing one of the biggest mega fit-out project for our group company for Mubadala. And we, as per the client also, aspirations and strategic objectives is to be really compliant to the sustainability agenda and the ESG. So we had to make sure that it's compliant with the LEED and WELL standards, looked at all the spectrum of the factors affecting the full equation. So I think from a regulation perspective, honestly, it helps a lot for us as operators, as owners of the service, as owners of these buildings. It helps us from operational perspective, from efficiency, and also if you look at it from a financial perspective, I'm sure that it's going to pay off at certain point in time. So the ROI is something that is no-brainer to whoever is going to adopt into the agenda of sustainability.
Yes, and the only question is how long will it take? And,
Exactly.
and as we heard earlier this afternoon, you have to take a different time view on a lot of these things. So, I mean, Farah, from your point of view, picking up on what, as I was saying, on the applicability of some of these standards, are you in your role on sustainability, you find that most of these standards are applicable and you can work with them?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to sustainability standards, whether it's on the built environment sector or on a larger corporate level perspective, the standards that exist are built, are very robust. They're built to be applicable in, let's say, the majority of the cases. And when they're not, there are usually alternative approaches to still be within the realms of the intent of the standard. We've also worked on developing such standards. For example, Mustadam in Saudi Arabia, it's a similar system to LEED and Istidama. And we were working together with Ministry of Housing there to develop that standard. And the intention of it is to address the cultural aspects of building sustainably in KSA. So I think developing these kind of standards that work not just from a globalized perspective, but also from a localized perspective, where it addresses the needs of the local community, as well as align with the global agendas towards climate change and sustainability. That's where efforts really shine.
And that localizing aspect is really interesting. And did you find that you started with a more sort of global document that existed already, and then took elements or added elements to that to make it more local?
Yeah, precisely. So we started with the commonly known international standards, and then start to strip out of it what seemed to be very North American oriented or very European oriented, and say, okay, that doesn't really apply here. That we don't need that heating. Who talks about heating in Saudi Arabia? So we started to strip them out and then add in concerns that were rising from the governmental entities there, that we want to preserve our culture. We want to make sure our buildings speak our language, speak our culture, our heritage. So we've implemented within the sustainability standards aspects that address that, and that's where I think sustainability is really interesting. Whenever we say it to the common public, they say sustainability, so it's energy, water, and then they can't think of a third or a fourth. Whereas to us, when we say sustainability, it's not just about the resource efficiency, but also about the health and well-being of the occupants. It's also about the cultural context of the building or of the corporation and its operations within its region.
Yeah, I mean, and that's as you say, very often forgotten, but the fundamental piece to it. And as we've seen recently in the UK, if you try to change the culture too much, then actually people start to reject some of this sort of green aspect. And it came across in the UK about the ability for people to drive large vehicles into the centres of cities without being charged huge amounts of money, and the balance that you need to get to encourage the change of behaviour without absolutely cutting people's legs from underneath them. Just moving on, Sam, I'll come to you on this around the measurement is clearly critical. Complexity of measurement, particularly when it comes to the sort of supply chain elements of what we do around in the built environment and so on. And this struck me particularly as another event I was attending. I was next to the chief sustainability strategy officer of PepsiCo. And PepsiCo, of course, have huge supply chains in really different areas, whether it's around the manufacturing or the actual bottles themselves, and down to the elements of having to talk to individual farmers about the seeds that they're using and where have those seeds come from. Mass complexity. It's still the same to a degree in the built environment. So how do we get about that measurement of the supply chain? How do we get our heads around that complexity?
It's big, isn't it? Well, I think to take some of the learnings from the UK is probably a good start. So in the UK, there is the PAS 2070, which is is directly around the supply chain and around the community-wide level of supply chain and decarbonising that supply chain, which is looking at that supply chain's carbon footprint from end to end. So I think taking things like that, things like the PAS 2080, so more about the infrastructure side of things, but also from a whole life carbon assessment, we've been able to start applying standards from the UK and then into UAE or into the likes of around the world. And this gives us decision-making frameworks that guide those type of principles, but not just the carbon elements. I mean, we were talking about well-being, but actually circular economy and resilience are parts of those. The seeds are a beautiful example of invasive species and issues around biodiversity. So these type of standards are being able to at least capture elements of that, and each standard is then embellishing and embodying another angle. So, as they become more particular, like the PAS 2080, specifically for infrastructure, specifically for decarbonisation, then we've got the one for 2070, which is specifically for supply chain. At least these standards are now becoming more dynamic and more specific, so that we can start targeting individual industries. And I think the way that we implement those is actually quite interesting. So there are really good case studies, like HS2 in the UK, for instance, has implemented PAS 2080, and they're aiming to achieve, I think, a 50% reduction by 2035 as part of the implementation of high-speed rail 2. But then bringing PAS into things like ISO, so that everyone actually recognises them, and that's allowing those things to be a bit more understandable. yeah, I think they're kind of the main things. And then, yeah, there's even being able to cascade it. So the likes of, sorry, I can never say it properly. Mubadala saying, okay, I'm going to be accredited for past 2080. That's cascading down to their supply chain. And that's actually being able to ensure that those standards are going all the way through the supply chain in a very coherent way.
And Azza, from your point of view, do you find that easy to put onto your supply chain? Because particularly in the world of facilities, the supply chain is huge, isn't it? So you're able to kind of make sure the supply chain is playing their part in this.
Actually, at Solutions Plus, what we are, currently, looking at from even a policy perspective is that from the procurement side of the equation is to look at, this carbon footprint major criteria for, engaging with the suppliers or whoever is the service provider. So it's a gradual, process. Definitely, it's not going to be in one go, in one shot. Otherwise, you'll have sort of disrupting your operations in a way or another. So it has to be gradual approach to achieve, this target. So yes, from procurement perspective, we're starting, to go through that path already. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So moving on now to a question. This comes in two parts, and it's about centralization of data. So the first part of it is should we be centralizing data so that others potentially can see it, so that we can actually bring stuff into the center, so it's not just individual pots of data, so across different organizations. And then if we do centralize it, the second part of this is, should it therefore be open source? Should it be free to all? Or actually, because if we do that, we're going to be taking away potential revenue streams from companies, because data, of course, is a big revenue stream or future revenue stream for a lot of organizations. So where do we stand on that? Firstly, the centralization, and then the whether it should be completely open source. So Farah, I'll come to you first on that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, when it comes to centralizing data, I think that's there are both advantages and disadvantages to that. The advantages for it is, of course, it streamlines the data collection and the development of the database itself, because then it's a unified entity that's working towards that effort. And then also it bolsters the reliability of this data, because it's a single source that is, of course, should be audited as well. And then the third advantage for a centralized source of data is that it allows us to create more realistic benchmarks, because then the same data sets can be used across different organizations or different assessments. The disadvantage of it is it might create some level of bureaucracy within whoever is responsible for generating that data and then distributing it. So I guess that addresses the centralization aspect. In terms of should it be open source or should it be commercialized, I was actually on the commercialized side of things until recently, where I had a discussion with a colleague, and they brought up examples of, okay, if we commercialize it, how do you guarantee that it's also easily accessible across all of the levels of a society that need this data? Is it going to be too expensive? Is it going to be too cheap? Where it's commercializing it becomes unnecessary. So I think that it shouldn't be commercialized. It should be open source. But I think just going on the same kind of chain of thought from His Excellency earlier, is that we have to be creative with the incentives of generating these unified or centralized databases. How do we make it commercially viable? Is there a commercial model that could work for a centralized data set that also preserves the accessibility of this data to everyone in the society?
Yes, and you get into that area where actually you need the regulation that says you have to provide this data to a central point to extract any kind of or rather remove commercialization from that aspect. Sam, you and your clients are struggling with this particular issue around how happy they are to put their data into an open source space.
Oh, thank you. It's such a good in. Generally, everyone, I think, is mainly quite uncomfortable with sharing any type of data whatsoever, even if it's within a tool. And as a big digital advocate, obviously, I'm going to push for the SaaS products, the software as a service products, which are all hosted on the cloud. But regionally, or even further afield, there's a nervousness around the idea of storing everything virtually and having this mysterious cloud that is somewhere in the world and is storing all your data. Having said that, actually, there's so much power in that in terms of the ability to do AI, the ability to secure your data more, and the ability to be able to actually apply regulations actually much more clearly. But going out to that point of regulation, we know that personal data, for instance, here has to stay in the country, which means that we have to develop our own clouds. So yes, there's definitely a nervousness about sharing data. I think centralizing this data is actually really key, but it's coming back to that data strategy. What do we need for what purpose? If I see it as like a pyramidal cascade, the people that we're talking about in terms of regulation probably only need one piece of information, and it's probably only one number. And yes, it probably should be anonymized. On the next layer, at the company-wide level or the group level, you'll have a bit more, but probably not loads. And then as you go layer by layer, you'll get more and more detail to be able to do what you need to do for your performance and your process monitoring. But in terms of the commercialization, I don't think you need to commercialize one number. What you can commercialize is the metadata and where the additional layers of that data come in. And that is where the true power of data comes in terms of revenue, because having just a number isn't enough to make a revenue. Having the context of where that data comes from is where you create revenue.
And as I'm coming to you on that one, clearly Mubadala, an enormous organisation. The data must be immense across that organisation. So, what's the perspective on sort of centralising it, potentially sharing it with other organisations?
Well, regarding what we are managing today from Solutions Plus perspective is the data related to whether the buildings or the clients that we are providing the services to. So back to your question pertaining to having one centralized, data hub and distributing it. I think, again, if you look at it from a regulatory perspective, ultimately, if the regulator, for example, for certain sectors is going to be responsible for providing you a permit to operate, giving you the license to operate your building, giving you the no objection to operate, maybe from a governmental perspective, it makes sense to have that centralized hub of data. But from a commercial entities, maybe semi-private entities, I think establishing a framework could suffice the purpose. But again, as we all understand, the confidentiality plays a big role here. And now the applicability of using the data from a regulator perspective, how they are going to use it, it's another different spectrum that is to be considered. Now, I think more important than just having a data bank is having the framework, honestly, to regulate all sorts of data available, the right structure for it, more than, honestly, centralizing it in a way or another. Yeah.
Thank you. And moving on to the sort of the methodologies and so on that we're using, and you named a few earlier on, Sam. There are a huge number of them. They're very varied. Of course, there are some that are about localization, as you were referring to, Farah. But do we have too many of them? And how might we go about actually sort of everybody landing on the same methodology? And of course, I have a vested interest in this, as you heard from Tina earlier today, the whole life carbon assessment methodology from RICS. I highly recommend it. It's an exceptional methodology. Do feel free to use it. It is free to use. That's the advertising pitch over. But just to sort of say, how do we go about landing on a single methodology? Sam, can I come to you first on that one?
It's really difficult because each of these different methodologies and the different protocols, they come with their own benefits and advantages and disadvantages, if we go back to what Farah was saying. I think you'll end up seeing the ones that either are the most easy to use and the most well explained, will probably end up coming out on top, just from a simplistic version. And as I was saying about earlier about being very industry specific, I think we do probably need to go into that industry specific, because the ones for FM won't apply to wastewater treatment works, it won't apply to roads and networks. So I think being able to have the right type of information and the right type of protocols. The data structure, yes, should be probably quite well fixed. And I think there are ways of doing that in terms of having, kind of the jargon of functional objects and these type of stuff. So having schema that are set by a regulator, but very, very simplistically, that define how you have to convert it, but in the cloud space or in wherever your data centers are, etc., you'll have that kind of mapping of those units and mapping of those conversion rates. So, yeah, I think we'll probably end up seeing the ones come out because they're the ones that are the most recognized and the most well understood. So.
And Farah, do you see when you're talking to your clients, are you sort of pushing them in a particular direction around methodologies, or do you help them? Do they choose on their own?
To be honest, no, we don't help them to choose on their own, because I'm a strong advocate of there should be a set standardized method of addressing an issue. While yes, sometimes you need to adapt, but I think if your approach itself is also adaptable, that it allows for adaptation, it simplifies the entire process. And part of that is because if you are addressing the same issue with different methodologies, you lose your benchmark, you lose your baseline where you can determine whether or not this particular approach was as appropriate as the other approach, given the context of the issue. And that's why I like the idea from, let's say, from the carbon emission assessment perspective. I like the idea of the GHG protocol standard, which essentially is the gold standard. Nobody does a GHG assessment without referring to the GHG protocol. Imagine if we had 5 different GHG protocols. Nobody will be doing their assessments the same way, and then the data becomes lost. Some are reporting higher, some are reporting lower, some are reporting intensity with dollar value, some are reporting intensity with God knows what. So having that kind of central golden standard to go to makes sure that such sensitive data and such sensitive issues, such as your carbon emissions, are done in an internationally acceptable and agreed on methodology, where then you can truly, compare apples to apples, develop a decarbonization strategy that is actionable based on concrete methodology that's been used and applied across the board.
I think that's very true, particularly as more and more companies become regional or even global, that they need that consistency of measurement and methods of operating so that they can do things in the same way wherever they are. Understanding, of course, there is always a local element to it.
Yeah, I'd add to that also. I'm not sure if many of the audience are aware of the ESG frameworks that govern the ESG reporting. We've recently heard about the IFRS and their standardization of the ESG reporting frameworks. There exist multiple frameworks to report your ESG initiatives or your ESG performance, and the IFRS is coming in to standardize that process to make sure that when I'm reading one ESG report, I can compare it to another, as opposed to, okay, this company is doing that, this company is doing this, but are they the same? Are they better? Are they worse? How do I benchmark them if the reporting standard itself is different?
For sure. Now, if anybody in the audience would like to ask a question, that would be absolutely fine. We can keep talking, but if there are questions out there, please let me know. We have a question over there.
My question actually stems from a podcast I was listening to this morning that was weighing up the pros and cons of AI. And one of the people on the podcast asserted that sustainability could be one of those areas where AI could be used to much more rapidly and more efficiently arrive at sort of sustainable solutions based on very complex and often conflicting data sets. Unfortunately, they didn't explain how that would be the case. So I'd just be interested in the panel's view on whether they would agree with that assertion, and if so, how AI could play that role.
AI is very, very powerful in itself, right? Because it's a self-learning tool. So, I mean, we were just talking about standards. Actually, if we throw an AI in two different standards and say compare these, no problem. Here you go. Here's the answer. So, I'm not doing you out of a job, but AI is going to do some of us slightly out of a job. We just have to interpret what it says. Yeah, so that's one example. But what's really powerful about AI is actually a lot of the baselining and sustainability is essentially around here's the baseline, here's what your benchmark based on your industry standards should be. How do you get there? And actually, it's very difficult sometimes to read that data because of errors, because of miscommunications, because of everything else, seasonal variations, diurnal variations. There's a big event like COP and it just screws up all of the different data points. So it's very difficult to actually identify trends. But AI, chuck all that into an AI machine and you'll actually be able to, it will be able to process those trends and actually understand what is the trend, what is your benchmark, where should you be aiming based on the different conditions. So I think there's a huge amount that AI can bring to sustainability. And they're just a couple of examples. The other one I mentioned earlier was around automation. And I think that's where AI and predictive analysis, prescriptive analysis, and then cognitive analysis have really been able to actually understand what the data says, what it's going to do, and then act accordingly automatically, is where we're going to get some huge jumps in efficiency, whether or not that's water, waste, energy, and everything else.
And as probably for you in the BIM space particularly, and all those devices that are the Internet of Things, as they used to be called, that, the AI analysis around that's going to be huge, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's... okay, I'm not an AI expert.
It's all right. You're amongst friends. No, none of us are. It's fine.
But looking at it from an automation and tool to help us in the analytics side of the equation, I think it's all about big data and short period of time for processing. So in a simple form that we can put any kind of data in a single, platform, digital platform, to process it for further analysis. Back to the BMS point that you just highlighted, or the building management systems, and the integration with the back end, with the systems, with the the different operating systems in the building, sensors and the likes. Again, it's all about how ultimately this is going to be integrated in one digital platform. And I think it's very important for us to utilize, the digital platforms. In fact, one of our major initiatives nowadays in Solutions Plus is to digitize all the data that we have in place across all the buildings. And we are starting this. Of course, it's going to take a huge effort, but it's an investment has been already put in place. We have started already by end of this year, and it's continuous effort. It's going to help a lot in the decision making. Talking about life cycle, for example, for certain assets, it's also going to inform the longevity of these, assets. What is it the right time for investment? When is it to introduce sustainability measures? When is it, that we need to think differently with, certain assets? So I think the automation and the AI is a huge tool if it's used in the right way and for the right purpose. Yeah.
I completely agree, and it brings you back then, of course, to that. It improves the quality of life as well, the experience you have within that building, driven by AI. Farah, do you want to comment on AI, or should we go back out to the audience? Maybe there are some AI experts. Who knows?
Well, yeah, I mean, if there are any, they're welcome to chime in. I guess what I can do is just throw some foods for thought. Whenever the term AI is mentioned, there's two types of AI that come to my mind. One is the common open source, like ChatGPT kind of AI. And then the other, which it would be more like, what's the opposite of open source? The closed kind of AI that is used by a private entity, or let's call them the private AIs that are developed by a certain organization to do their own tasks or to do their own analytics. And I think that using AI in the sustainability field can be powerful on both ends. It's just that it might have its own risks as well. And that's why you still need a human factor to truly drive the AI engine itself and also interpret what it's bringing out. A lot of times I use AI as a team member, another head to throw ideas and grab ideas from. But I don't rely on it specifically to give me a concrete answer, so to speak. And that's because of two things. I've read also recently a paper that says ChatGPT is getting dumber, and they don't know why. That's something, And then if we're talking about the private kind of AIs, who developed it and what did they feed it, and was that audited, and is that in line with the actual perform or the actual standards that say that you want to implement, and then eventually doesn't that AI become a reflection of its own developer, and then if it's allowed to go on its own to self-teach, are you able to monitor where they collect that data? If ChatGPT is getting dumber because it's open source, if a private AI goes rogue and tries to learn by itself, where is it getting that data? Is that data that it's getting correct or not? Is AI able to understand, is my data or my information correct or not? So there's a lot of questions when it comes to AI, and while yes, there are people who think that AI would replace a lot of jobs. That is possibly true. I think from a sustainability and from a consulting perspective, it might be a bit far-fetched. It will make consultants' life a lot easier. They can probably tackle more projects as opposed to being handled a fewer number of projects. But you always need the human mind to interpret the data and truly introduce logic to whatever the AI is spewing out.
I completely agree, and I think it, again, back to the point we made earlier on about it can release humans from the drudgery of repetitive tasks and give us all the opportunity to spend more time thinking, which I suspect everybody in their daily life from time to time thinks, God, I just need some more time to think and to stop doing. So it would be beneficial for all of us. Before I ask my last question, are there any questions from the audience anybody would like to ask? Okay, everybody keen to have a break, it would seem. So my last question, and I have to confess now, I'm springing this on the panel. So there is no pre-preparation, and you can now see they're looking uncomfortable. So I apologize in advance. It's quite an easy question, so don't worry. What is the one thing that you hope that COP28 will achieve? Anybody like to go first before I pick somebody at random?
Ladies first.
Whoa.
Ladies first.
And there was I thinking you were going to say something.
I was going to say, come on, Justin, you can give us your view first, can't you? Well, we have time to think.
Flipping it back at you.
Goodness, the audience turned rather quickly then, didn't it? Wasn't expecting that. My absolute hope from COP28, and actually I did see a bit of this last night in the Buildings Breakthrough activity, but my real hope is that all of the commitments that are made, all of the words that are spoken over the past few days and in the coming days, they become action and things get done. So I think COP28, the entire COP series is a brilliant construct for getting people to commit. And we now just have to make sure that we've got the resources and the willingness and the time and investment for people to actually get on and do something. And I saw it in Building Breakthroughs last night because we went into a big session where everybody was saying, right, who's picking up this work stream? By the time we come back together in Paris in March, what are you going to have done? And it was just, for me, a real moment of, wow, we're going from the big, massive plenary commitments to action. And it was fantastic. Right, have you had enough time? And who'd like to go first?
I'll go first.
Sam, you're on.
So I think there's an incredible buzz around COP28, and I actually think it's amazing. Like, I don't think anyone has walked around the city, apart, especially because they shut Sheikh Zayed for a day, and that was obviously a bit of a chaotic issue. But I think this is where we can kind of bounce on not necessarily what COP's going to drive, but what COP's brought to Dubai. So the green zone, I'm on a WhatsApp group, and honestly, every 30 minutes there's 60 messages of people who are engaging, who are connecting, who are showing new innovations, who are doing talks, who are doing stuff all over. And I think we need to recognize that, it's everyone from the likes of Jacobs and these big companies all the way down to individual entrepreneurs that are actually making differences in their own communities. And I think I guess I would like to bounce on that and kind of challenge everyone in this room to also continue that message, because we talked about it earlier, and sustainability doesn't work if only we talk about it. We have to talk about it to everyone else, like our friends, our family. And there are some incredible workshops and methodologies, or even just simple conversations you can have with, your kids, like through STEAM events, or I don't know if you've ever heard of Climate Fresk, but I absolutely love it. Go check it out. It's a card game based on the IPCC reports. There's the 2 tons, which shows you how much carbon footprint you have on a daily basis. There's so many incredible NGOs and workshops and associations that you can bounce on and actually learn more, and then and continue those messages further.
Brilliant, thank you, Sam. So getting climate change into your daily life, and your family life. Azza, I'm going to come to you next.
Honestly, I'm very optimistic with the COP28 as it stands today, with a lot of announcements that we have been witnessing in the previous couple of days, and more to come, as we can see. So one thing that I really wish to see after the COP is that more structured approach across all the sectors towards achieving the sustainability agenda. In the past, it could have been sort of optional, but I think it should be more, structured approach, more, regulated, a lot of, kind of monitoring and control on, achieving the, phases of our strategic plans. I think this will make us all really have the ownership and the accountability and responsibility to attribute and to contribute to the sustainability agenda. So I just wish to see that more, structured approach and, more engagement.
Brilliant, thank you, Azza. And of course, for me, that's perfect, because as a regulator, we're very, very happy to hear that plea and to help you with it. Finally, Farah.
I think I have 3 things that I'm hoping out of
Is it going to be long? Because I asked for one.
I'll try to be very quickly. I mean, the regulations one, I think we've all just described it, and I think I guess coming back to the idea that it is a UK Council hosted panel, the UK has a lot of regulations and policies in place that support decarbonization, whether it's on the ESG reporting or carbon reporting or energy standards that exist in the UK. And I think that's a strong point for collaboration between the EU and the UK, where we can bring the experience of developing these policies and regulations from the UK side of things and implement them here. I'd love to see regulations about, at least let's start reporting your carbon. Don't give me a reduction plan. Don't commit to net zero. Just commit to reporting your carbon emissions. That's a great first step. The second thing I'm hoping for is let's hear more about realistic targets, and that's something interesting that I've heard from the Ministry of Energy at the time. In one of the panels, they said there's a lot of talk about phasing out fossil fuels, or removing fossil fuels from the equation, and the fact that the COP28 is happening in a fuel-driven, in a country that's fuel-driven economy, is quite interesting, because while yes, I believe that fossil fuels contribute a lot to emissions, is the problem the fossil fuel itself or the way the fossil fuels are used? So those are some of the foods for thought that the ministry was giving out. Can we address the issue of emissions from fossil fuels without not relying on fossil fuels for energy? Do we even have alternative energy methods that can satisfy the globe without fossil fuels? Is 2050 reasonable time frame for us to have a complete transition from no fossil fuels from 100% or 80% fossil fuels to 0 fossil fuels. I think that's not realistic, so it's good to hear some more down-to-earth, more realistic and practical approaches from COP28, as opposed to what we are used to as slogans and statements. And lastly is going back to Sam's idea is engagement with the community. Again, also in that same panel with the ministry, it was with the with the youth hub, and they were addressing the youth specifically and telling them, don't think you don't have influence. You have influence on your little brother. You have influence on your mother. You have influence on your father. So engage with your families, engage with your friends about the issue of climate change, and let's spread awareness outside of this circle. We've been here talking about decarbonization, ESG, blah, blah, blah. Everything, you've already heard it before. I've talked about this, hundreds of times before. But the people outside don't know anything about it. And if they're not engaged, there's no solution.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, the final message of engage. So it simply remains for me to say thank you to Harriet Watt for hosting us here. Thank you to the UAE UK Business Council as well for running this whole event. Fascinating. And again, that whole sharing of ideas and making sure that we can engage. And of course, thank you to the brilliant panel, to Sam, to Farah, to Azza for your perspectives. Very good to see you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.